welcome everyone to VNTANA's webinar on best practices in 3D animation for web and AR. I'm Ashley Crowder. I'm one of the co-founders of VNTANA. I work with a lot of our clients spanning apparel, footwear, home goods, consumer goods. We've got a few different examples for you, and we get lots of questions on animation. So we wanted to take the time for our senior technical 3D artist, Tyler, to walk through how to take simple animations as well as rigged bone animations today and upload them to VNTANA for optimization and create an interactive web viewer and make sure those animations work in augmented reality as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley, for that awesome introduction. So today we're going to be going over a couple different things, geometry animations and skeletal mesh animations. So we're going to jump into the geometry animation part. And so what is that? Geometry animation is just simple animation consisting of shape or position changes to our actual geometry that's being applied over time. And so we're going to jump into a really quick example of setting up an exploded view animation in Blender. So let's dive in. So we have our really awesome engine that we picked up from Sketchfab. And a couple of the things that we need to make, sure that our asset has before we apply the animation is that it helps if all of our mesh components are broken up into individual mesh components and they're not grouped or joined to other assets. And so as you can see in our scene outliner, we have our assets broken up into multiple mesh components, and we can even check that out if we're in our viewport. It also helps if we have unique pivot points for those mesh components. So clicking around, we can definitely see that we have that. That is the case for this asset. And so we need to make our way to the animation tab in Blender. And to do that, we just need to click the animation tab at the top of Blender, and this will open up our animation viewport, and which will give us access to our timeline, which is located in our dope sheet at the bottom of our animation window. So I'm going to move our time marker to keyframe 0. We can control the length of our animation in our dope sheet if we come to the start and end. So ours is set to 1, to start at 1 and end at 250, which is perfect. So I'm just going to come to the first frame of our animation. I'm going to hit S in my viewport. Whoop, I need to select everything first. So we're going to select everything first, and then I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. And now we have our initial keyframe set. If you're using the default Blender hotkeys, that'll be I. I'm using the industry standard, which is why it's S. So now I'm going to come to the last frame of my animation, and I'm going to hit S, or it might be I for you. And so now we have our start and our end keyframe set. Now we're going to come to the fun part, which is actually getting that exploded view animation set. So I'm going to hit R on my keyboard to go to the scale tool. We're going to be using the scale tool to help us achieve this effect. So with all of our assets selected, I'm going to take the scale tool and I'm just going to apply some scale. But as you can see, with the default settings of a scale tool, we just get this nice uniform scale, which is perfect for most cases, but not really for what we need. So I'm going to Control Z that. And I'm going to expand my properties panel, and I'm going to come to my active tool and workspace settings. And I'm going to expand the options, and then I'm going to expand transform. And then under location settings, or under locations, I want to make sure that that is enabled. So now with that enabled, I'm going to come back to my viewport and I'm going to apply some scale. And as you can see, when we apply some scale, we get this nice exploded view effect. So I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. And now, if I scrub our animation to frame 0 and I hit space on my keyboard, you can see we get this nice animated exploded view. So now that that's been, now that we've applied the animation, we are ready to export. So I'm going to hit space on my keyboard to stop the animation. I'm going to scrub it all the way back to frame 0. Everything is still selected, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to come to File, Export, GLTF. And so now I can export. The default export settings are fine. We just need to come to animation and expand animation again. And we want to make sure that group by NLA track is unchecked. And now we're ready to export. After we've exported our asset, we can come to VNTANA and we are ready to upload. So to upload, we can click Add Product. I'm going to go to where I exported my engine. I'm going to drag it into the upload asset page. This is going to populate the name of our asset. From here, we can select our optimization pipeline. For us, we're going to be using other, and we just want to make sure that Draco compression is disabled. And then you would click create. And so we've already done that. So we can take a look at the engine on platform. So if we come back, and if you wanted to check out the engine in XR on platform, please scan this QR code right here. But just to kind of recap the geometry animation, it helps if we have our animation, our asset broken up into individual mesh components prior to export. And then when we do export as a GLB, we need to make sure that we need to make sure that group by NLA track is not enabled on export. And then when we upload to platform, we need to make sure that we disable Draco compression.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Tyler. If you can just go back, because I know you did that really fast, go back to Blender. And I just want to make sure we highlight, the export settings that you choose are extremely important. It's kind of like if you have a PowerPoint, you can save it as a PowerPoint or a PDF, which results in totally different outputs. So 3D is the same way. So if you can just go back, Tyler, so we can kind of walk people through. So if you do File, Export, and you definitely want to hit GLTF. And click that. And then these are kind of those settings on the right he was mentioning. So you want to make sure, if you want to walk through these, Tyler, to make sure you have all the proper settings checked.
Right. So the setting that we need to make sure that we check to get the animation to come out is we want to make sure that this group by NLA track is unchecked. Also, this animation checkbox should be checked, but if it's not, go ahead and check that to make sure that that animation does get exported. You'll note that we've selected everything here. There is a flag to include everything, only selected objects. Our case wasn't necessary, but if you have everything selected and you only want to export the selected objects, this is where we would do that.
Great. And anything on transform data or shape keys we need to worry about?
Not in this example.
Great. Cool. So at that point, you would hit export GLTF. And that is what you would upload to VNTANA. And then if you go back to VNTANA, just on those optimization settings, you can just hit edit here. It's easiest. So we're usually choosing where our file came from. The reason we hit other, that's kind of all encompassing. If you click that drop down, Tyler, we do have some really specific pipelines for Browseware, Keyshot, Clo. So if you are coming from those programs, you want to make sure you select it. If you're like, I don't see the program that I'm coming from, other is your safe bet. And then we have different pipelines created for various other use cases where if you want to preserve meshes and UVs, you want to create something for Unreal Engine. But when in doubt, if you're like, I don't know what to pick, you can pick other and it'll be fine. And so if you hop back to the PowerPoint slide that you made, great. So once it's uploaded to VNTANA, we automatically optimize it. We also create a USDZ. So if you scan that QR code, the 3D animation will work on the web as well as an augmented reality on Android and iOS phones. So, we take care of that part for you. But great. Yeah, that was simple animations, really great for exploded views of products, like opening a fridge, things like that. But next we'll get into the slightly more complicated rigged bone animation. So making avatars move.
Yes, so we're gonna jumping into skeletal mesh animations. And so kind of what is a skeletal mesh? What is a skeletal mesh animation?
Sorry, I don't mean to pause you. We do have questions on the last one.
Okay.
So we have our lamp product designed in Fusion 360, and we want to have a custom build feature on our website. Customers can easily choose style, product category, and number of models to build their lamp. Now on the next AR screen, the custom built lamp can be placed in users' home environment real time, giving them complete experience of the live product virtually. So how can we make this possible with VNTANA? Yeah, so we actually do work with Fusion 360 as well. It would be kind of similar. You'd want that GLB export. I believe that there's a plugin we've used. Tyler, you can kind of talk to that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we can. Yeah, we definitely handle the Fusion models. If you export as a GLB, I believe that's the best way to get it out of Fusion. I know Fusion does offer an FBX a solution as well, which will work. It just depends on how you have your materials set up. If you could send us some examples, we would love to dive in and get into more details about how to make that happen.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you also like want a configurator. So we do configurators as well. Basically, there's a couple ways that can work. So with VNTANA, you can upload different 3D models of all your different options and just group them together, which is the easiest way to quickly create a configurator. And then you can have multiple 3D models in one viewer that people are choosing between. Or you would need to build your 3D model with the different mesh components separated. And you can use our API with our JS component to create that 3D configurator. We actually have a press release coming out tomorrow. One of our clients who created a very cool custom configurator. So stay tuned. We can share more then. But yeah, just, email us at info@VNTANA if we didn't fully answer your question, and we can dig deeper. And then it looks like another question we had was curious to know why we need to disable Draco compression.
Oh, and that's so that we can view the animations in XR. And
yeah.
I want to say it's just XR. It might be in the viewer as well, but just a good fail-safe to just disable it if we have animations, because Draco compression can interfere with the product's or the asset's animation.
Great. And then another question, can a custom bone rig be set up? For example, I need more spine components, especially in the shoulder and neck region. Great. Well, I'm now going to turn it over to Tyler to go through this, and then we'll answer all the other questions about avatars. So
awesome. Yeah. So that's a really good segue into that. So we'll just go ahead and answer that question. It may be a little out of context right now, but we'll just dive into it. So can you have can you augment the skeletal mesh? Yes, you can. As long as you're staying within, I mean, it depends on your workflow and your animations, obviously. But if you have animations that support that skeletal structure, then it should. And as long as it stays within the standard bipedal humanoid rig definition, meaning like 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, then Mixamo should be able to understand it and retarget its animations to that. So I hope I answered your question. So we're going to dive into this. So I think we were at what is a skeletal mesh. I know we got real complicated real quick, but we're going to go back to basics real quick. So what is a skeletal mesh for those of us that don't know? A skeletal mesh is just it's an asset with 2 components. We have our skeleton structure, which is just a set of interconnected bones that control the overall shape and movement of our asset. And then we have our mesh, which is effectively the skin of our asset. Now, it's a little hard to understand without a visual. So let's jump into Maya real quick, where we're going to be taking a look at this. So I'm using the base Unreal 4 player avatar as a skeletal mesh. And so we're here in Maya. And so taking a look in our outliner. If your outliner isn't open,
not to interrupt, but this is a free avatar that you can download and use, right? So anybody look to kind of test and play around, you can download this for free from Unreal.
Yeah, so this is going to be included in your Unreal project, and you can export it from your Unreal project by right-clicking on the skeletal mesh and then exporting it out as an FBX, and then we can import it into Maya, which is what we see here. And so if we're looking at our asset, this root node, so if we need to open up our outliner in Maya, that's going to tell us all the awesome stuff that's included in our scene. So which is open right here. If yours isn't open, you can go to Windows, Outliner to open up our outliner. And so the root, that's our rig, that's our skeleton, and then the mesh, that's the skin of our asset. So as you can see in Maya, we have a group node, and then we have our skeleton, and then we have our geometry. So it's one thing talking about skeletal mesh assets. It's really important to know that the skeletal mesh and the skeletal mesh animation can be two separate files. And typically, the animation file is made to work specifically with the skeletal mesh it's designed for. Now, animations can be shared across different skeletal meshes as long as the joint structure, the skeletal structure, is the same, or the animation has been retargeted. And that's where Mixamo comes in. Mixamo is a really awesome animation retargeter that has a big library of animations that allows us to either upload our characters with a skeletal structure, or our characters without a skeletal structure, as long as they have geometry that cover the head, hands, and feet. Then Mixamo will apply the skeleton and then retarget its animations to your avatar. So in our case, we have a skeletal mesh, and we're going to be uploading this to Mixamo so that we can apply an animation and then upload to VNTANA. So in order to do this, we have to make a few edits to our asset here. The reason for that is we have a group node, which is awesome in most cases. In the group node, when we're creating animation, typically is just going to control the overall global position of our asset. And then all of the animation specific data is going to be applied to our animation skeleton. Now, when we upload this to Mixamo, Mixamo is going to think that our group node is the root of our skeleton and is going to be applying animation data to this that we don't need. So to get around that, we're going to be removing the group node from the asset. Also, if we expand the root node, you can see that we have the root, and then the pelvis is the next joint in the chain. And then we have two other chains. We have an IK foot root chain, and we have an IK hand root chain. Now, the IK foot and IK hand root chains are helper joint chains that aren't part of the standard bipedal character definition. So we're going to be removing those so that Mixamo doesn't get confused. And yeah, all right. So now that we've kind of outlined what we're going to be doing to the asset, let's get started. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to marquee select my asset in Maya. But as you'll see that I haven't selected my mesh. That's because Maya tends to prefer joint selection over geometry selection. So I can either come and shift select my asset in the viewport, or I can just select them in my outliner. So now that I have my mesh and my skeleton selected in my outliner, I can middle mouse and move the selected assets above the group node, which is going to ungroup them. So now you'll see that our assets are ungrouped, which is awesome, but our mesh is now not aligned with our skeleton. And that's because if we check out our group node here in our channel box, if your channel box isn't open, you can hit Control A. So if the right hand side of your screen looks like that, hit Control A, and that'll bring up our channel box. So now that we have our channel box, you can see that we have a negative 90 rotation applied to our X. So we need to apply that to our mesh, and then we need to zero out those transforms before we can move on. So let's select our mesh. And if we select our mesh, you'll notice that we don't see any gizmos in the 3D viewport. And we also, when we take a look at our channel box, you'll see that in our channel box, that in between our channel name and our channel value, we have this gray box, and that's indicating that that channel is locked. And so it's effectively uneditable. So in order to edit this value, I'm going to select rotate Z. I'm going to shift select I'm going to select rotate X. I'm going to shift select rotate Z, and I'm going to right click in my channel box, and I'm going to click unlock selected. Now, sometimes this doesn't work the first time, so I'm going to have to do this again. Unlock selected. Beautiful. Now that our channels are unlocked, I can add my negative 90 rotation. So now I've applied the negative 90 rotation, and our asset and our mesh is aligned with our rig, which is exactly what we want. Now we need to zero out the transforms on our rotation. Excuse me. All right. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to modify and then freeze transforms. Now, if I do this by default, I'm going to get an error. And the reason I'm getting an error is because freeze transforms is going to our asset and saying, hey, I want to freeze all of your transforms. So that includes your translate, your rotate, and your scale. But our assets, like, I can't do that because my translate and my scale values are locked. So we can either unlock our channels in our asset, or we can go up to Windows, or modify, and we come up to the freeze transforms dialog box. And from here, we want to uncheck translate and uncheck scale. And then we can click apply. And now you'll see that we've frozen our rotation values, which is exactly what we want. So I can close out my freeze transforms. We can delete this group node. And now we can come into our root node, and I can select my IK hand and my IK foot joint chains and just hit delete on my keyboard. And so now our skeleton is...
For some of the people who might be more beginners, why do we need to freeze the transforms?
So freezing the transforms is just clearing out any sort of extra information that doesn't need to be there. Especially when we're dealing with rigging, transforms and hierarchy are very important. So especially when we're dealing with animation retargeters and things like that, which is why we're removing the group node. And it's just a really good rule of thumb that we don't want to have any extra information attached to our asset that we don't need. So even if we're doing like a standard export without any animations, if we have any extra transforms that don't need to be there, so if these values were reading like 10, 12, random numbers that don't need to be there, we can see that whenever we go to another viewer, sometimes our asset might not be in the correct position or may just appear incorrectly. And that's because of these extraneous values that we just need to freeze and reset to 0 before we export.
Got it. And that's great. And so now I'll let you, take it on to Mixamo, and Mixamo is a great place to get basically like pre-done animation. Like, I don't know how to animate, but like I want to animate this avatar. Mixamo is a great place to do that, right?
Yeah. So we're almost ready to go to Mixamo. But we have one more thing that we need to do before we go to Mixamo. So we need to make sure that our materials are applied to our asset prior to export. So I'm going to select my mesh, and I'm going to click on this sphere icon in my shelf, which is our hypershade. So now with my hypershade open and my geometry still selected, I want to go to graph material on selected objects. Now this is going to show us the material that's applied to our current asset. So now, since we have PBR materials coming from Unreal, we want to make sure that we apply a PBR material in Maya. So we're going to click on Stingray PBS, and it should create a... Okay, it's being goofy. There you go. All right. So under the create pane, we can click create Stingray PBS. If it's being like it was just a minute ago, just close out the hypershade and reopen it. So now we have a Stingray material created, and I just want to select the out color, and I want to drop it down to the surface shader of our mesh, which is our mannequin shading group here. So now that we've applied our Stingray material to our asset, we want to go ahead and make sure that we get our textures that we had from Unreal here. One thing to note, I did have to break up the textures coming from Unreal. So by default, these textures are targas, which can give us some issue if we go directly to platform, to VNTANA. So I imported them into Photoshop, and I exported them as PNGs just so that we can avoid any sort of weirdness. So I'm going to drag those textures into our viewer, and I'm just going to move them around real quick so that they're easier to work with. All right, so now that we have our textures, I'm just going to take the out color of my diffuse texture, and I'm going to plug it into the text color map. I'm going to take the out color of my roughness, and I'm going to apply it to the text roughness map. And I'm going to take the out color of my normals, and I'm going to plug that into the text normal map. Now I want to select my Stingray material, and I just want to make sure that use color is enabled, use normal map is enabled, and use roughness map is enabled. Now I can close my hypershade. But our textures aren't showing up in our 3D viewport. Well, that's because we need to go to shading. We need to go to hardware texturing. Now we have our textures on our asset, which is awesome. And so if I select my skeleton and I select my geometry, we are ready to export to go to Mixamo. So if I go to File, Export Selection, we want to make sure that we are exporting as an FBX. So FBX export should be selected at the bottom. The default export settings will be fine. The only thing that we really need to make sure that we enable is embedded media. So make sure embedded media is enabled. If we don't do this, our textures are not going to come through on the export, and so we won't get them in our animation. So after we export, we are ready to go to Mixamo. So we're going to go to Mixamo. And to upload your character, it's really simple. We're just going to click this upload character button. We're going to drag our FBX that we just exported into this window, and then we'll go and Mixamo will walk us through the import process. For this example, since we have a skeletal mesh, it's just it'll run through the detection process, see that we have a skeletal mesh, and then you should see your asset animating on Mixamo. If you don't have a skeleton, it's going to run through the auto rigging process, and in which case you'll just need to make sure that that you have geometry for your head, hands, and feet. So then after the upload process has been complete, you can now select your animation. We're going to be using this awesome dancing animation. And so we can click download. And this is, and now we have our download options. The default download options are perfect. But the skin part, this is where this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where the skeletal mesh can be different than the skeletal mesh animation. So if you want the mesh and the animation to be in the same file, we want to select with skin, and that'll give us the skeleton and the mesh. If you select without skin, that's just going to give us the skeleton and no mesh. So we're going to download this, and it's going to give us an FBX. Now from here, you can either upload it directly to VNTANA, or you could import it into another program to do any editing. We're going to import it into Maya and pretend that we're at the use case where we have an animation in Maya that we need to export as a GLB. So we're going to jump back to Maya real quick. So we have our awesome dancing animation in Maya. And if I click play on my timeline, you can see we have this awesome animation. He's really busting a move, and we're ready to get that out as a GLB. So in order to do that, I just want to make sure I select everything. Again, the same thing as we did before. If I marquee select, I just want to make sure that I have my geometry selected, or we could just select them in the outliner, which is what I prefer to do. From there, we are ready to export. So if we come up to the top and go to Babylon file exporter, if you don't have the open Babylon file exporter installed in Maya, you can download that by going to our resources center and checking out our Maya documentation. We should have links to the GLB exporter there. And so once you've downloaded and installed that and go to Babylon file exporter, you'll get these options. And so we want to make sure our output format is set to GLB. The file name is going to help us define where we're going to actually be exporting this to. So we'll name it. And then we want to make sure the default settings are perfect. We want to make sure that export animations is checked, and then we can click export. And so after we've exported it, we can come to platform in the same process as before. If we go back and we go to add product, we can select our animation. We can select our silly dancing. We can drag it there. Again, pipeline will be other. And then we just want to make sure that Draco compression is set to off. And then we can click create. And after we've done that, we can go back. We've already uploaded that, so we can check that out. And after you've uploaded it, you can see we have our awesome dancing animation on platform. So, and you guys can check that out by scanning that QR code right there. So just to recap, when we're exporting our animations from any program to Mixamo, we want to make sure that we embed the media on our FBX so that we can get our textures into Mixamo. We also want to know that Mixamo is going to view the group node, any sort of main group node, as the root node, and apply animations to that node, which may not give us the result that we want. So we need to prep that. Also, we need to make sure that our skeletal mesh assets follow the standard bipedal skeletal mesh definition, and bipedal being 2 arms, 2 legs. sort of thing. And then when we are exporting a GLB from Maya, we just need to make sure we're using the Babylon plugin, and we need to make sure that we export and that the animations box is checked. And then when we're optimizing on platform, we just want to make sure that Draco compression is disabled. And so that wraps it up for the skeletal mesh animations. I'm going to hand it over to Ashley, and she's got some cool news for you.
Yeah. So go back one slide. I'm going to dig a bit deeper and go through the questions. So if you scan that QR code, you will see that we automatically created the optimized GLB. So that animation works on web and augmented reality Android phones, as well as we created the optimized USDZ animated file. So it'll work on iOS augmented reality as well, which is pretty cool. So we just kind of handle that for you. And then, just to kind of explain, Mixamo, great to just get pre-made animations. You could go directly from Mixamo to VNTANA. We just brought that back into Maya to show you if you are building custom animations in Maya, you don't need to go to Mixamo, but wanted to make sure you guys saw those ideal export settings as well. We do have a question. Is it possible to export animated garments along with an avatar from Clo? Yes, it is. And that is going to be on our next webinar because exports from Clo also contain morph animations. So those are kind of a third type of animation. So there's, a few other things you kind of need to do with that. But we are planning a follow-up webinar, a bit more advanced, because then we're going to have rig and morph animations from Clo and Browseware and other programs. And we got more questions. Mixamo is a starting point, correct? Clarification for certain conditions. Extra nodes that are not within a software's auto rig may still exist, but their degrees of freedom will be locked or not activated.
So, it depends on what auto rigger we're talking about. So if you have helper nodes that are used for like props or things like that, it's always important when we go to Mixamo that we want to remove those helper joint chains, and we want to just stick with the standard bipedal skeletal definition. So, and the Unreal character gives us a lot of extra stuff. So as long as it's, I believe our Unreal character had some helper joint chains. So all helper joint chains aren't bad. It's just we need to make sure that we have. Okay, so this one is pretty standard. So I'll have to get back to you on that, because I know the new Unreal player character has a bunch of helper joints, but I don't think those should cause issues in Mixamo since they are parents to them. This one, I think that the other helper joints should be good. It's just the helper joints that are outside of that standard bipedal skeletal definition are the only ones that I've seen to give Mixamo an issue.
Got it. And then the question, what happens if the avatar only has one leg?
Then Mixamo won't be able to work with it. So Mixamo requires just a bipedal skeletal structure. So you'll have to create your own custom animations for that.
But that's what Maya is great for. So if you're, more advanced and you can do animations in Maya, like you can do any type of thing you want and then follow those same export directions. But we wanted to show kind of like the off the shelf, grab something from Mixamo if you're just getting started. So great.
There's one thing to add to that one. When we create our own custom animations, there are some things that you will need extra. So we have our skeleton here. Typically, when you create animations from scratch, you create what's known as a control rig, which is just a series of helpers that allow the artist to select the joint easily and then apply the keyframe to the helper instead of applying it to the rig, because there are certain instances that if you apply that information directly onto the rig, the skeleton, then before you're ready to export, it can cause issues. So one thing to note, it gets a little bit more advanced if we go our own custom animations from scratch, but we can cover that at a later date.
Cool. And then this is a question. So can we place 3D garments on bodies through mobile phone via VNTANA? So you're asking for clothing try-on. Clothing try-on is kind of totally different, but In general, clothing try-on just isn't quite there yet. I personally think Snap is one of the farthest along with Snap Lens, which is pretty cool because you can now use Snap Lens on e-commerce sites and places outside of Snapchat. At VNTANA, our whole goal is to be your cloud 3D content management system. So we want to make it easy for you to upload, manage, and deploy your 3D assets everywhere they need to go. And that includes being able to automatically optimize and prep them for places like Snap Lens. So in order to use something like Snap Lens, you have to have that garment rigged properly. So this is kind of webinar step one of like, if you have an avatar with a rig already, this is how you do it. We'll be getting into kind of more of those complicated setups at a later webinar, but in general, clothing try-on is just kind of okay right now. So I have high hopes for Snap though. Any other questions? Okay, continuing the last question. To make the object look real on an augmented reality home environment, you need to work with shadow, depth perception, etc. Is there something you guys can help after we are done animating, building the product? So kind of the realism depends a lot on the materials that you're using. So I'd say step one is making sure that you have the best real-time ready PBR materials possible. You do need to be working with PBR materials for things to work on the web and in augmented reality, not pre-rendered. So there is a difference there. You want to make sure you're using PBR. Adobe Substance is a great library you can go to, but that's kind of step one. And then I'll kind of turn it over to Tyler for.
Yeah, and so when we talk about rendering the asset, in these different areas, like between the web render and XR render, it's one thing to really note, just kind of keep in mind, I guess, that when we're going to XR, we're doing a really quick, almost kind of half photosphere of our environment. And what that's doing is that's giving us a lot of information. So for one, our reflections, and number two, that's also how the system is deriving the lighting information. So how the asset appears in XR is really heavily dependent upon kind of how the device perceives the environment around you in order to dictate, where lights are going to be placed, and if there's any sort of like environmental shadows, like drop shadow, to help it blend into the environment better. And that's going to, I just want to highlight some of the differences between the renders, but going to what Ashley is saying, 100%, making sure that the PBR materials are set, that you're using roughness maps. If you don't have PBR materials, Substance is a really great place to source those to ensure that the fidelity is where you want. And yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tyler. And then another question, can we upload multi 3D garments to VNTANA, same space, and view through QR AR view, like a lineup of garments? Yeah. So if you have multiple 3D assets together, you can export them together as one. But Tyler, I don't know if you have more input.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly what you were, like our 3D showroom, so that we could view all of the garments together. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple ways. So you could, if you had individual garments, multiple 3D models, you could upload them separately to VNTANA, and then you could group them together in what we call like our simple configurator. So however many models you have, you can group together. And then you've got this viewer where you can toggle through the different options. If you wanted all 3D assets to appear in one viewer, that's where you'd want to group them together. You could bring them all into something like Blender, free program, group them, and then export a single GLB that had all the options and upload that together. That's a great.
If you wanted it one at a time, you could do what you just said, and then either animate the scale or animate the visibility, and then you could have it cycling between the different assets as well. So if you like, so you could bring in three different, as many different garments as you wanted into Blender, put them all on the origin of the scene. And then it should work by animating visibility, but if that doesn't work, animating the scale will 100% work. And so you would, if visibility doesn't work, you could animate the scale. And to do that, let's say you wanted it on keyframe 1 to be visible, and on the second keyframe we wouldn't want it visible. So we would just change our scale from 1 to 0 in the lapse of 2 keyframes, and then do that multiple times, and then that should get us the effect that we're looking for.
A great question. Awesome. Well, I think those are all the questions. I know we have 5 more minutes planned. So I'll keep this open. But yeah, so for those of you who are freelancers, feel free to scan this QR code. We do have a free version that's limited to 5 assets that you can log in, test out. So you can kind of just start to learn and practice. So if you're a student, freelance designer, feel free. You just have to apply on our website. Great. Well, if questions come up later, feel free to email at info@vntana.com. Happy to help. And you all will receive a recording of the session. So you can kind of go back and pause to see all those settings we chose. But thanks all for joining us.